separated somewhere in the line there.
Okay, duly noted. And you were a sergeant?
Yep.
Okay. And were you drafted or did you enlist into the Army?
Actually, I was planning on enlisting in October of 40 when I became 18. But
You know what? I have to make sure this thing is on. Because it's not usually enough sound. Just 1 minute. Sorry. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
I was planning on enlisting on my birthday when I became 18 in October. But my mother told me, why not wait until after Christmas? Well, it just turned out that in January of 41, they froze enlistments. So I actually went into the service at my request through the draft in February.
I see. So they thought they had enlisted enough people and then they preferred the draft.
Well, it was, the draft was becoming the way to go. The bureaucracy, it was easier to handle it all in one way. So that's why my serial number begins with 3 instead of 1.
Yeah, I heard that. So why did you decide to join the military?
The war was on, and it was the thing to do. And my father had been in World War I and served in France, and so. And I'm the eldest in the family.
Okay.
So.
And why did you pick the service branch of the Army, or maybe it picked you?
Yeah, it sort of picked me, I guess.
Yeah. Do you recall your first days in the service?
My first date?
Your first days in the Army?
Oh, early on, yeah. We gathered in New London and got on the railroad that went north through Norwich and into Massachusetts. The Vermont Railroad was running a line then, and we ended up at Camp Devens, Fort Devens, Massachusetts, for processing. And it was, they had a system all lined up for in physical inspection and shots and uniforms and all that. And you were only supposed to be there for 3 days or so. Unfortunately, they loaded us onto trucks to go into air, to get on the train to go to wherever our basic training was going to be. And the truck I was on had an accident on the way in. It dropped its drive shaft so that it came to a sudden stop. And unfortunately, I was one of the first on the bus, on the truck, and was facing forward and loosened a couple of my teeth. So they shipped me back to Fort Devens for a month. So the first 4 weekends I was in the Army, I was home on leave. Of course, after a week in the Army, I was barracks chief and teaching the new recruits how to make a bed.
Really?
And so that started me off rather interestingly. So after a month, I get put in with a bunch of other recruits and put on a train and shipped to Miami Beach for basic training in March of 41. So that's where I had my basic training. And we had an interesting guy from New York State as our flight leader, and we had a marvelous time marching around the streets of Miami Beach.
It's a nice place to train.
Yeah, it was. We lived in the Broad Ripple Hotel, but that's not what we called it, of course. Close, but not quite. But they'd taken over all the hotels along the beach front and converted them to barracks with three high bunks and crowded in the rooms. But it was good.
Yeah. It's a nice way to get introduced to the Army.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this was boot camp, right?
Huh?
It was boot camp.
It was basic training, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had to learn how to shoot a rifle and shoot a machine gun and march and regular stuff.
Regular stuff. Yeah. Do you remember your instructors from boot camp?
I don't remember his name. I can almost picture him, but but not quite. And there was so many after him.
Was he an effective instructor?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had a marvelous time.
Yeah.
He taught us, and we sang and marched. He had us doing monkey drills. That is, you'd be marching along the street, and he'd yell out a command that you do while you're standing still. So you have to stop and do it, and then pick up the pace and march again.
Like in a group, you had to all
Yep.
do that?
Yep.
That sounds hard.
Yeah, it was tricky,
Yeah.
but we got it down pretty good. We called it monkey drill.
What was it like being, was this your first time away from home?
Yeah, except for summer vacations, of course, which was usually with relatives of one sort or another. But
It was probably a big group of 18 and 19-year-old
Yeah.
recruits.
Yep.
So.
I found a nothing like mental blocks.
Right.
Coconut, about this big around, and I sent it home to my mother, and she bawled me out for it.
Why?
So I had to send her home a proper eating
Proper
one.
one.
And but I corresponded a lot.
So where did you go from Miami?
From Miami, they put us through tests to find out what we might be suited for, and I came up with company clerk or cryptographer. And I chose cryptography. So they put me on another train and shipped me north to Paulding, New York. And I went to Paulding Prep School, which the Army had taken over and converted to a training facility for cryptographers. And that course was a month long too. And let's see, I was in Miami in March and in Paulding in April, and I had an interesting experience there. We arrived in Paulding on a Friday, and we got settled in our rooms and registered in our assignments and so forth. And they stressed this is top security that I was being introduced to. And they stressed it very highly at the school. So we had fire duties, and we had guard duties, as well as going to school. So we got there on Friday, and we got acclimated and assigned to various jobs, and we got weekend passes if we were anywhere nearby. And of course I lived in Waterford, Connecticut at that time, outside of New London, and got a weekend pass home. Well, unfortunately, I didn't check and find out how I was going to get back to Paulding on Sunday. And when I did, I found that I would not be there in time for guard duty at midnight on Sunday night, Monday morning, fire duty. Well, being a new recruit in the Army and all that sort of stuff, I figured out what I had to do, and then they were stressing security and all that stuff. So what I ended up doing was sending a telegram to the commanding officer to let him know that I wouldn't be there for fire duty at midnight. Well, my punishment was to be confined to the school the rest of my duration there. So there went my weekend passes. And on the last, and I ended up with guard duty of all sorts. One of my guard duties, I remember, was on a Saturday, and it was the staircase, the officers' training facility classes were upstairs, and ours were downstairs. And again, it was a boys' prep school. And at one point, they have a flight of stairs that goes up to a landing and then turns and goes up the other half. And one of their guard posts was on that landing. I was on guard duty one Saturday, when the CO comes in with a guest, showing him around the facilities. And they had a list in the guard room of people that could go anywhere on the base. And I didn't know at the time, but the CO at that point in time could go anywhere on the base, even though he wasn't listed. But he wasn't listed. So there I am with an armed rifle ordering him to stop. And I wouldn't let it pass. So he stood with his guest at the bottom of the stairs and discussed what was upstairs that he wasn't going to see on my watch anyway. And he left. The next time I was on guard duty, his name was on the list. But anyway, and on the last Sunday that I was there, I got permission to have no guard duties. And I arranged for my mother and father and sisters to come up and have a picnic on the grounds. And we had a marvelous time. Except for the fact that this was, again, during rationing time, and they had 7 flat tires driving from Waterford to Pawling, New York. And all of the girls, my younger sisters, were sworn to secrecy. They were not to tell me. And I didn't know until months later how much trouble they had getting there. But we had a marvelous time.
Somebody must have been good at patching tires.
Yeah, well, you had to be then.
Had to be, yeah.
You had to be. Well, we shipped out next, and we graduated. And our graduation class, I got a copy of the orders that shipped us. This was we graduated May 18th, 1943. I thought it had a class. Well, I don't know what. Oh, that's right. This is a special order. No, this was our whole class. That's right. We all graduated. Well, we didn't all graduate. We had 67 that graduated. And what I figured was that they had 100 in each class, and they passed 2/3. At least that's what I surmised. And so the 67 of us graduated, and they didn't know what to do with us. So they shipped us to Oklahoma City, to Kelly Field for a month. And then they shipped us to California, and they shipped us in 3 different places in California, and the 67 of us were together all the while. And that's a large bunch of guys.
Yeah.
So there were 3 of us that sort of palled around together. And their names escape me. I didn't think it ever would. Well, it'll come back to me. Oh, Will O'Brien was one. He was from Maine. And the other guy was from New York. The son of a minister. It doesn't come to me. Well, anyway. So the three of us sort of palled around together. And we were all together. As I said, well, come here. We graduated in May, and we finally got on a boat in July in California. And they kept shipping us from one base to another. And we were all together on the Hermitage, which was our ship. It was an Italian ocean liner that got caught in the Panama Canal and converted back to a troop ship because Mussolini had used it as a troop ship to get to Ethiopia earlier. But it was an ocean liner. And once we got to India, then they divided us all up. And we got shipped all over the place. And I ended up going across India on a railroad, working railroad, narrow gauge. Every time you came to a new state or a river where there was no bridge, you had to get off the train you were on and take a ferry or get on another train with a different gauge. And finally we got to the eastern part of India and got on a boat and went up the Brahmaputra River. And that took 2 weeks. And then we ended up at air bases all over the place.
Were these areas that you were traveling through pacified areas? I mean, there was no conflict?
Oh yeah, no. They were just, it was India.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot about it. I spent a year in India at Tezpur Air Base, and then a year in northern Burma at Tezpur Air Base. This is when the British were driving the Japanese out of the northern part of Burma and driving them back to the sea. And we got up there. Of course, I had all sorts of experiences in India.
Really?
5 of us got together at Tezpur and established the University of Tezpur. And 4 days a week, we each took a subject. There were 4 of us. and studied up on it, and then lectured to the other three, one evening a week. And on the 5th day, we took Hindi lessons from an educated Indian who was always criticizing us or asking leading questions of us on why the British had interred his German pastor. They were Lutheran. He was Lutheran. And so it was rather interesting. Hindi is a rather interesting language in the sense that we got to the point in our learning so that we could pick up a newspaper written in Hindi and read it to an Indian, and he would know what we were saying, even if we didn't, because we didn't have the vocabulary. It has 66 letters, but they're always pronounced the same, and the accents in words are always the same. So once you have the alphabet down pat, you can read Hindi and it would make sense, even if it doesn't make sense to you, because you haven't got the vocabulary yet. That comes later. Well, they were opening up bases in northern Burma, and I got a call to report to headquarters to become part of a team opening up a new airfield in northern Burma. I was the only cryptographer, along with I guess there were 14, 15 of us. And we flew down to our base in India, and it was the end of monsoon. And we got down there, and the airfield was it was a grass strip that had been an airfield before the war for the British, but it was grass, and it was underwater, so we couldn't land. So we went back to our headquarters in Burma and spent a week, and then flew down and established the base. There were 16 engineers that had gone in by truck to fill up the holes in the runway that we had bombed, and so that we could land. And they were there, and they'd already been there and set up shop. An interesting latrine. It was a structure of bamboo rods suspended over a brook. It didn't last long, but it was what we had when we got there. And the Japanese we were told that the Japanese were 11 miles away at that point. But it had taken the British a month to get them that far away. So we felt pretty secure. And the only Japanese that we saw around our place were dead ones. So I was there for a year, and during that year we watched as a mile-long airfield was constructed 2 miles away. Buildings of all sorts were constructed, and a full-size airport was created where there'd been this little dirt strip previously. And the war, and we ended up with a lot of P-38s, which were dual fuselage fighter planes, but they carried small bombs under their wings. And we had cargo planes that passed through on their way to China over the hump, and we were a way station for them. And we saw lots of Chinese troops that had been trained in India by Americans and British, and were going home to continue the war in China. And shipped a lot of gasoline over the hump in barrels.
Did that airfield have the same name as the old airfield?
No, this was called Tesbur.
Oh, this is Tesbur.
Yeah. The other airfield was still in operation. I ended up getting an assistant cryptographer who didn't do much and was younger than I was, even new recruit. He was a Yale man and very well-to-do. His father was a millionaire out in Chicago.
Did you spend long hours in the radio reception area?
Yes and no. It depended on how many of you there were and how many got shipped out. The worst it ever got was 6 on, 6 off,
Ooh.
which was pretty rough. But usually it was a rotating shift of 6 hours on and 18 off.
Because really you had to encrypt just about every communication that went in and around.
Yes, at the beginning especially. By and large, the first, in India, when we first got there, the encryption was using British ciphers primarily. Then eventually they started sending out coded messages of ships leaving and arriving, and so they just have a funny word in a book for arrival or departure, and numbers identifying the airplane. But there wasn't any encryption there, that was just coding. And the communication was all by Morse code, radio men in the other room sending out the messages that we gave them to send, and receiving the messages that we had to decode.
I guess, was radio too difficult to transmit in that area?
Voice radio?
Yeah.
We just didn't have it.
You just didn't have it at all?
No.
Huh.
Except between the control tower and the radio and the airplane.
Oh.
Once we got down to Burma, I interrupted myself down there. The field grew, and then it vanished. The war moved farther south. So all the airplanes went further south, and all the personnel went with them. And we ended up, 3 of us, operating a homing beacon at Tesburg. And we were the only ones around. And we went out to the British quartermaster and got meals for each day. And once a month, I would go out by railroad to our headquarters and pick up a month's supply of American goods and bring it home. But we had no way of preserving anything. We had to accept stuff that was already preserved, or eat it quick. So we long since determined that 2 meals a day were about our maximum of preserving. That way we could finish everything that we had for a meal and not preserve anything. But we had canned goods and dry stuff. And one time I went out, I didn't drive, so whenever I took the railroad out to headquarters, I had to make arrangements with headquarters to get a driver in a vehicle, and to drive me around to pick up my supplies. And one time we got in there when they had a load of fresh American beef in that wasn't on our menu because we didn't have any way of preserving it. So the driver that I had said, "If I talk about a hunk of this stuff, can I share it with you?" And we said, "Absolutely." I did. So we got some fresh meat, and so did they. While the base was in full bloom, when the field was there and the airplanes were there and everything, we had fresh meat all the time, because some outfit was a good shot, and there were lots of deer around. And for a period of time there, during that year, we had venison 3 times a week. We also had a visiting Burmese who came around selling eggs, and we used to buy eggs from him, and we never got a bad one. But we cooked them up and ate them quickly.
Did you have to treat the water?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes. All the water was treated. And of course we got rid of our latrines rather quickly. But we did every once in a while go fishing with hand grenades. We'd get a party together, and a bunch of guys would go downstream in a fairly large stream, and where there was a big pool upstream where the fish congregated, they'd toss in some hand grenades and stun the fish so that the guys downstream could catch them. So we had fresh fish.
Must have been a fairly peaceful existence up there.
Yeah. Yeah, the war was we had air raids once in a while when the Japanese would fly over, but we had radar out and we'd get warned well in advance, so we'd turn out all the lights. And I think there was only one time a bunch of the planes were coming back from further on where they had targets to bomb, and they had one 50-pound bomb left over, and apparently somebody had lit a light on, turned the light on early, and they threw the bomb at it but missed.
So that was pretty much the extent of the combat that you had to face?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One time the word got back out when the three of us were there, got back out to wherever the base that our former CO was stationed at, and he heard that we didn't have any fresh bread, so he talked somebody into landing at our field with 6 loaves of bread, which we enjoyed. We're wondering what in the world is this plane coming in for?
Yeah. Well, did you have so did you have a cryptography machine that you?
Yes, little machines. They weren't mechanical the way that they were in 1951. 1951, when I went back in the reserves, why they had teletype machines then that were converted to cipher machines. And this was in Alaska too, so. But this was, we didn't have any electricity. Oh yes, we did. We had a generator to keep the Morse code signal going 24 hours a day. And the three of us were supposed to be on duty at all times. That's why there were 3 of us. We were supposed to be up. But what our mechanic did was rig up a loudspeaker system so that we had the Morse code signal going off constantly 24/7. And it stopped twice during the night, and we woke up. One time the generator ran out of gas, the other time was there was something wrong with the mechanisms that the mechanic had to fix.
So you had to be really on alert in case somebody needed that.
Yeah.
Needed anything coded.
Well, we got so used to it going off that the silence woke us up.
Yeah, the silence.
And after I left there, for probably three or 4 months afterward, I heard that Morse code in my head constantly. WWW, no, VVV, WZPI.
Huh. That's amazing. So really, your unit was lucky to not have casualties. More than likely.
Yes, yes. Some of the guys got sick once in a while. I got sick once in a while, but nothing serious. and no danger. Looking back now, in Burma, well, even before then, I was a hiker. And I used to go on long hikes on my time off by myself. And looking back on it now.
In the jungle?
Yeah, in villages. It's a wonder I didn't get killed just for the 45 I was carrying for my own protection.
Yeah, that sounds like a kind of a risky proposition.
Yeah, but it never occurred to me then.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
Letters.
Letters,
yeah. Always letters. Back and forth. Still got them.
Yeah. Probably quite a few.
Yep.
So, aside from hiking and aside from going to get supplies, did you have any way to entertain yourselves out there?
Yeah.
Fishing with grenades.
We had a Red Cross canteen, finally, on the base, once it got big enough to warrant one, where you could get donuts and coffee and see girls. We went swimming a lot.
Was it very tropical at this location?
Yes. In the wintertime, it got chilly, but we never had frost. And the first fresh field ripe pineapple that I ever had was in the summertime over there in Burma. And it's nothing like you get in the store.
No. Was there something especially that you did for good luck, or was anyone superstitious in the group?
None that I know of.
Did you ever get entertainers up there?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
A USO troop came in one time. The first 4-engine plane to land in Burma at our base. Unfortunately, the nose wheel collapsed on landing. So only part of the show went on. Oh, we had movies.
Oh.
Both in India and in Burma. As far as the USO is concerned, their plane was inoperable, so they ended up getting flown back to headquarters again. So we never saw the show. Let's see. In India, saw Paulette Goddard.
Oh.
She was around one time for a show. Another thing about India is we had bearers. We had kids, Indian kids that worked for us, that did our laundry for us and things like that. They were Muslim. There were 2 boys and a girl, and they had a hut of some sort on the base that the little girl took care of for the 2 boys who took care of us. And We had mosquito netting, of course, because malaria was, and we took Atabrine every day, which made our skins yellow. So when I got home, my mother took one look at me and shipped me off to the doctor to see if I had jaundice or not. But I was clean.
Did you stay free of malaria while you were?
Yep.
Oh, that's great.
Yep. Took my Atabrine.
That's good.
Let's see.
Well, did you play pranks on your fellow soldiers, or did they do anything?
Oh, yeah, to some extent. And, but
Probably you had to be pretty
Oh.
supportive of each other way out there.
I had one guy who was a staff sergeant, and somewhat older than I was. He and I were on midnight shift for quite a spell, and he was a champion checker player, and we played checkers, and I learned an awful lot about checkers from him. Oh, I can't remember his name.
Were you able to take any leave while you were stationed there?
No, I never did. And that was unfortunate because in talking with the guys around, why they got time off to go to the foothills of the Himalayas and things like that. One of the things I always objected to was the fact that I could see snow all year round. We're a long way from it.
Couldn't get there.
No. And I hadn't gotten interested in mountains until I got to college, which was after the war.
Yes. Do you remember the day that your service ended? And then
Oh. That was, let's see, which was that? Oh, yes. I don't remember the day particularly. I remember the site. Where was it?
That was in 1943?
Yeah.
Okay. So were you still in Burma when that
No.
happened?
No. I was home. Of the three of us that were operating the homing beacon, I had more points than the other two guys. So I got to go first. So I flew out and left them. By that time, the war was over, so everything was being transmitted in plain English anyway. Oh, that was another interesting thing. We had telephone in Burma, and we were on a party line with 7 other people, and part of our entertainment of the 3 of us was listening in on party lines. Nobody ever called us. And I would go out, it was 40 miles by rail to our headquarters in Burma, where I would pick up rations, once a month. And what we had was a 1 passenger car and 1 freight car and a Jeep that had flange wheels and rode the tracks. And a 1-track that they'd repaired. And halfway up was a large river, the Mogong River, and we had long since bombed out the bridge, the railroad bridge. And our engineers had built out of wood a trestle for the Jeep Railroad to go across. But it couldn't carry a steam railroad, a wooden fired railroad. So they were all on the other side of the trestle. So our Jeep would pull the two cars across and then drive off the Jeep and put on the steam railroad on the other side to take us the other 20 miles up to headquarters. Well, the first time I went out, we stopped on the Jeep side of the river so that an engineer officer could get off the Jeep and walk across. He didn't trust it to carry the Jeep across. But the rest of us rode. And then he got back on again. He got on to the train.
The other two vehicles, were they on a carrier so the Jeep could pull the whole contraption, or?
No, they were regular cars.
Oh, so they just
smaller ones.
together.
Smaller ones.
Yeah,
and they were. It was just a train.
Yeah, it's just a little.
Pulled by a Jeep.
A very small convoy.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
And then coming back, they do the same thing. And I'd have to round up a British vehicle down at Samoa to drive me and my supplies up to our base.
So you were back in the States when the war ended?
Oh yeah, when the war ended. Let's see. I flew out of our base to Chabwa, Calcutta, and hung around there for quite a while until they were making up a train, shipment home. And I ended up coming home on a Liberty ship, all the way from India. I went over on an ocean liner and came back on a Liberty ship. There were 12 of us in bunks in what amounted to a chicken coop, which was tied down over one of the front hole covers on the front deck of the Liberty ship. And when we were crossing the Atlantic, we hit some pretty rough water, and you had to gauge your trip to the mess hall from your bunk room across the deck between waves so that you didn't get your feet wet. And besides us, there were supposedly some 25 or 30 civilians and officers somewhere else on board the ship that we never saw. And 150 rhesus monkeys that were in cages up on deck.
So,
going home.
let me just see if I understand this. Your quarters were above decks or below?
Yeah, above.
Were above decks.
Yeah.
So you were exposed to the elements.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But they.
Well, it was all closed in.
Oh, it was closed in.
Oh yeah,
Oh.
it was all closed in.
With canvas or whatever.
No, wood.
Oh, with wood. Okay, but they didn't have room for you anywhere else.
No.
So this was very sort of seat of the pants kind of
Yeah.
shelter.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. But it was a merchant marine ship. So we didn't have any duties to perform or anything like that. And we had cards and chess and checkers and stuff like that to entertain us in the evening. And when we went in for a meal, we were presented with a menu. And whatever was on the menu, we could choose to have served to us by the waiters. It was merchant marine.
It was very nice.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were blessedly free of supervision by officers during most of your service.
Yep. And we were due to, let's see, we sailed out of Calcutta and we stopped at Sri Lanka on Ceylon, but didn't get off there. But we picked up supplies, and then we sailed across the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea and through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, and stopped at Port Said, Egypt, on the canal, and actually got off the ship there on a pass. And
why did they choose that route rather than the Pacific route?
It's the closest to New York City, which was our destination. We didn't make our destination, however. There was a longshoreman strike on New York City when we crossed the Atlantic. So we ended up in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh my gosh.
And we had one of our CBI reunions in Charleston, and I was the only one that landed there.
Really?
Of the 67 Sad Sacks. This was the 67 Sad Sacks. And I didn't know when or what the date was that we landed. So while we were reunioning in Charleston, I went to the public library, and I knew that we landed in '43, and it was in the fall. So I started going through the newspapers until I found the ship from India. I knew it was the oh heavens.
So you were still short of your 20th birthday when you got home.
Yes.
So in other words, this was your little unit off in the jungles of Burma. You were the most senior serviceman. So I mean, that's kind of like,
Having been in CBI, I was the senior one. The other two had come in later.
So that's called a lot of independence at a young age.
Yeah. Oh. Another instance of that I had while the three of us were in Burma. We all woke up one morning, and off in the distance was a huge cloud of smoke. And we couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It was nowhere near our field. And we mulled over between the three of us as to whether we'd heard an airplane the evening before, and whether there had been a crash. So we got to talking, and finally I decided to take a walk. So I strapped on my .45 and started heading to where the smoke was coming from. And I kept following it and following it, following it. And finally I came to a village, native village. And I couldn't speak a word of Burmese. But there are an awful lot of Indians in Burma. So I communicated with the Burmese that I ran into as much as I could. I was looking for somebody who spoke Hindi, an Indian, and finally got routed to one, an old man who spoke Hindi. And I communicated with him that I was looking for the fire that we had seen in the distance. And finally he talked to one of the younger men and told me where to go. And they led me to a huge building that had burned down the night before.
Just an ordinary fire.
Yeah.
So that was the Hindi that you had just picked up, you know, while you were in India?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after your service in the Army ended,
let's see.
what happened after that?
Where I got to Charleston. Where did I go after Charleston? I think we got passes to go home with orders to report. Where did I report? I'd have to look on my papers.
Yeah. Probably back to New England somewhere?
I don't think it was Devon's.
And after your service, did you work or go to school?
Let's see. Again, I'd have to look at the dates. I landed in, no dates on that. I forgot what the date was in Charleston. But anyway, I came home, and I think I stayed home. And the GI Bill was in effect, and I decided to go to college. So I started in February at the University of Connecticut at Storrs. And took 4.5 years to graduate. But I didn't go to work. No.
And did that education support your work after college?
Yes and no. I majored in agriculture, as Joan did, and graduated in June of 1950. I went to work somewhere, but I don't know where. But anyway.
And then shortly after that, you went back into the service?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then at that time, they sent you to Alaska?
Yep. As a cryptographer.
As a cryptographer. And what was that like?
Huh?
What was that like in Alaska?
That was at Eielson Air Force Base, which is 30 miles south of Fairbanks, and has nothing around it except an air base, but a shuttle bus that goes back and forth between Eielson and Fairbanks. And I ended up buying a bicycle at the police station in Fairbanks, and kept it at the Y in Fairbanks, and took the shuttle bus back and forth, and then pedaled around the city. And that got me out to the University of Alaska, which is in the outskirts of Fairbanks. So I saw their museum and their buildings. And of course, the Y had excursions all around Fairbanks too.
And how long was your service at that time?
It was under a year. I got up there in the spring. And then experienced the midnight sun. And ended up leaving in November around Thanksgiving time. In the meantime, while I was home and in college, I was in the reserves, and I ended up in 2 reserve outfits at the same time. They had what they called the organized reserve, which had to do with your service during World War II and the outfit you were with, and that was at Westover Airfield, and that was once a month. And once a week, I met with the volunteer reserve, which met over at the Groton Airport. And that was made up of all sorts of reservists. And every week we'd go over, and there'd be more rumors about getting recalled and so forth and so forth. And I didn't want to get recalled with that outfit. So I finally requested recall in '51 because they were announcing my MOS at ball games and things like that on TV, on radio. And so I ended up
What's an MOS?
Military occupation specialty. I don't know.
So they were looking for people like you.
They were looking for cryptographers, yes. So anyway, I got recalled. And they sent me to Fort Dix, New Jersey to activate me again. And I got down there, and eventually they shipped me, put me on a train, and shipped me to Oklahoma City, Tinkerfield, Oklahoma, which was our headquarters for AACS, which I was part of during World War II. Only now, instead of Army Airways Communication System, it stood for Air and Airways Communication System. It was part of the Air Force. So I got down there late on a Friday, and they wouldn't process my papers until Monday morning. So Monday morning I reported to the office, and they looked me over, and yes, you're a cryptographer, but you haven't passed clearance for our new enemies. And so I couldn't be a cryptographer as such. So what they did was send me back to Westover as a teletype operator until my clearance came through. So I was at Westover for a month in the spring of '41, and I either went whitewater canoeing with the AMC or I went home every weekend for a month until my clearance came through. And then I took the message over teletype for 2 cryptographers to go to Alaska. And I was the only one available. And my clearance still hadn't come through yet, but it was due any day then. So I was the one of the 2 that went from Massachusetts to Alaska. And so I got leave and went home, and the Army had a system of giving you fare to go from where you were at, which was home, to my new base in California. And you can take the cash and go any way you want to. So I took the cash and I visited the New London Greyhound station, got a map, and plotted my own route across the country. Mostly on Greyhound, but other cross-country buses got in the works too. So I plotted my route, and I saw Niagara Falls and went across Alberta and Canada to Michigan. And then ended up spending a night at the Y in Duluth, Minnesota, because there wasn't any bus out until the morning. And I was planning on going through Yellowstone Park on the Greyhound bus, but it wasn't running yet. So I had to go around the park and down through Utah. But Salt Lake City was pretty nice too. And I got to California, and my papers were screwed up again. My papers were always getting screwed up. And I couldn't ship out to Alaska yet. So I asked around to see if I could talk them into giving me a bus trip to Alaska. I knew a bus ran there, but they wouldn't do it. They shipped me up by a Navy ship, and I went around the world during World War II, never got sick, but I got sick going to Alaska. Well, my papers were screwed up, so I was the first one on the roster. I was the first one on board ship, and I was the first one in the bow. And we hit rough water. It was a Navy ship. Went up and down, up and down. But anyway.
So it was a little less isolated
Yep.
than in Alaska than it had
Yeah.
been in Burma.
Yeah. Yep.
It's easier to communicate.
Yeah. I went panning for gold and found some.
You made any close friendships while you were in the service?
Temporarily once. I had two friends at Eielson Air Force Base in our outfit. One was a guy from Ansonia who was black, and the other guy was a white guy from South Carolina. We were definitely not a threesome. We were two pairs, and I hung around with each of them at various times.
What did you go on to do as a career after the war?
Okay. I came home from Alaska, had some more GI Bill time. Scouted around. I'd taken, in my agriculture studies at UConn, I'd taken all of their plant genetic courses that they had offered. And I was fascinated by it. So I decided, well, maybe I'll be a plant geneticist. So I got catalogs out and looked around, and the University of Minnesota had an excellent master's degree course in plant genetics. So it sounded good to me. So I went out there and registered and spent 2 years taking the coursework necessary for a master's degree in plant genetics, and never wrote the thesis. Because by that time, I'd gone to student counseling at UMass, University of Minnesota, because I didn't care for the professional plant geneticists that I met out there. And I found that you were told more what you had to breed in the way of plant genetics than what you wanted to breed. But in the meantime, I'd gotten familiar with computers. But the only computers that the University of Minnesota had were strictly for administrative purposes, not for student use. But I was familiar with them, and so I changed my mind. I was going to be a computer person. So I came back east after finishing my coursework, and lived at home. And when? See, where? Oh, yes. My mother talked me into going to teachers college in New Britain and get my teacher's certificate. I said, okay, I'll give it a try. So I took there 6 or 8 weeks in one summer. And right away, in the practice teaching that we did with the kids that were willing to go to school in the summertime, for us to play with, that I was going to have a problem if I didn't get 5th grade. And I applied for 5th grade all over the place. And at that point, which was 43, I guess, they were still looking for female 5th grade teachers, unless you were a principal at the time. in the 6th grade school. So I ended up in Canton High with 8th grade. I had the the slow third of the 8th grade in the morning and the smart third of the 8th grade in the afternoon. And I taught for half a year. Those that wanted to learn learned a lot from me. And they're having their, if they're having a 50th reunion, it's next year. And I'm going to see if they have one. And I'm going to see if I can get invited. Because I kidded with my mother. My mother was a one-room school teacher when I was born, and taught during the war and after. So she had lots of classes, and I only had one. And I kidded her about it. But anyway, so in the summer before I taught half year, I toured Hartford looking for computer jobs. You know, all the insurance companies. They were looking for math majors or insurance people because they didn't have computers yet. They were just starting. So February came around and I got fired, and I went back to Hartford again, and this time I got a job with Phoenix on computers. I was the first one that they hired strictly for computers, and they didn't have a computer yet. They were using IBMs. They were borrowing, but we were doing the coding on Elm Street at the time, and I was with them for 27 years.
Is that what they call Little Phoenix or Phoenix Life?
Phoenix, it was Phoenix Mutual Life Insurance Company, yeah. And it became the Phoenix when it moved to the boat building down at the Center College. Yeah.
So that turned into your careers.
Yeah. And that was the right move. Of course, back in the early days, in the 60s and whatever, we were changing computer systems very, very frequently.
I'm sure that's true.
And because IBM kept increasing the machines. But anyway, so it was, and now it's completely I've got a computer here, but we're not on the internet, and I don't know anything. Joan took a course in BASIC at the high school years and years and years ago, and of course it's all passé now.
Oh, that's a fascinating field. Well, do you think that your military experience influenced your thinking about war or about the military in general?
It certainly changed. I was the first one to go to college in my family, except for my mother going to Yale one summer when she was teaching in one-room school. And then she went to Willimantic during the war.
So it had
Certainly.
a big influence on her.
Yes, because of the guys I was with. Like I said, I probably was one of the few guys that went in the Army and learned how to play chess and bridge from the guys I was with. And poker.
And poker.
And it changed my mind about the Army too, or I wouldn't have stayed in the reserve. No, I was really, when I came out, I was really hoping that I'd be back in rather soon, because I figured personally that we had to get straight with Russia. We couldn't leave things the way they were at the end of World War II. Well, things straightened out anyway.
Well, they eventually did. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
Oh.
Well, we could turn off the camera, and sometimes that makes things come back to you all of a sudden.
Well, I can think of all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Coming back from Alaska, I flew down to Great Falls, Montana, and checked in there, and my papers were screwed up again. And they said, well, we can either keep you here until your papers get straightened out, or we can send you to the nearest air base to your home. And I said, well, I want to go home. So they sent me to Cape Cod. The last week in November. And I froze to death. It had been 30 below up in Alaska, but it was a dry cold.
Yeah.
And you get out there
Yeah.
in the wintertime and it's damp. But at least I got home. So I was released the second time out on Cape Cod.
So we really had a bunch of adventures, really. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Oh,
it.
and another thing another screw up.
Yeah.
Of course, I got on, when I sent my telegram to the CO, I goofed, but I learned after that. Except when I finally got to California on my way to Alaska, again, my papers were screwed up out there, so they made me a company clerk. So I was on duty in the office out there for a month, processing shipments to Alaska of personnel. And I got sort of curious as to whether they were shipping replacements to go to existing offices up there in Alaska, or whether they were putting teams together like they did for us in Burma to go up as a team to a new outfit. So I started getting nosy with some of the records that were passing through my hands until somebody questioned what I was up to.
Embarrassing moment.
And I ended up getting summons to a security. I never told her this. I finally ended up getting summons to a security officer for an interview. And I convinced him what I was up to. But I quit what I was doing too.
I guess they do have their rules. Well, thank you so much. And